Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so yeah, very nice to see you all again. I supposed to be getting us off the wheel. It's a very hard thing to do, so I can't speak from a lot of experience. But yeah, we've been going around the wheel for quite a long time, and you've got these sheets. I mean, I need to make a couple of caveats actually before I start the talk proper. So the first caveat is I think I've changed my mind about the title. So if anyone's thinking of the title, I haven't changed it. I just haven't got one anymore. The second caveat is if you're expecting me to lead you up this neat, smooth, white, glistening path of a few words, I'm afraid you're going to be disappointed. But I do want to, in a way, evoke the spiral, and I want to invoke the, a creative life. So I'm going to leave the wheel, but not using this diagram. And what I'd like to do is basically talk about this is another sort of caveat, I want to talk about 4 different beings, and basically only two of them have had a material form, if you like, and the other 2 haven't. So what I just want to clarify at this point is, from my point of view, and I'm pretty sure this is the Buddhist tradition, although those don't always meet up. But anyway, from my point of view, not all beings have a material form attached to them, if you see what I mean. Not all beings come in material form, and there are definitely kind of beings that exist that have a profound effect on life, that have a profound effect on my life and the lives of others, that don't have a material form. Okay? So I just want to say that in advance, because it's easy to get into thinking that unless something is matter, therefore it's not real, if you see what I mean. And that's not the distinction I want us to make. So I'm just going to talk about 4 beings, one after the other. And, what I'm suggesting is that they're all as real and powerful as each other, okay, whether they've got a material form or not. The first being, as it were, that I really wanted to speak about, I won't speak very much, but I did want to just say Bhante. I just wanted to mention my teacher, and some of us have been, mentioning him along the route, as it were, and I just wanted to say that this first being, he did have a material form. He passed away recently, but I mean, what I'm trying to say is that sometimes you need the teachings of the Buddha, like conditioned co-production and the 4 Noble Truths, to get an understanding of what practice might be like. But you also need that to be embodied in an actual life. And I've seen through Bhante what it means to be a Buddhist embodied in an actual life, if you see what I mean. In a way, he doesn't need to also do amazing teachings, just read his life and you'll see what it's like, what a Buddhist life is like. So I wanted to start off with that not all of the teachings of the Buddha are sort of in neat books and you can pick up and put down. I wanted to start with Bhante because he's lived a really, really creative, progressive life, and I would say that he's lived a life like off the spiral, not off the spiral, off the wheel, or mainly off the wheel. He's kind of kind of envisioned a life. He's not only his own life. I mean, if you can, I really would read his memoirs. They're extraordinary. They really are extraordinary. You won't have time to read them on this retreat. But his memoirs are extraordinary. And you just have this arc of a life, completely Buddhist through and through. And, just a remarkable man, living a remarkable life. So I wanted to at least start there, that not all teachings are, written in books or the word of the Buddha. They're lived lives. And in this retreat, what we're doing, if you've been touched by anything on this retreat, if you've been inspired by anything, if you feel moved by being here and some of the things we've done, it's come from his vision, Sangharakshita's vision. And I'm sure you know he's buried just out there. And each night after the puja, I've been going out and just circumambulating, like this big mound of earth. It's still quite raw. I quite like that. And just circumambulating this, in a way it's a shrine, isn't it? Circumambulating this grave. And it's so beautiful. Just 3 times. And last night the stars were out. Very, very beautiful. And it feels very meaningful. So there's Bhante. That's the first being that I wanted to mention. Very influential person, and in a way, all of his inspiration has flown through him from other teachers. I must say also another thing to mention is if you can't really be a Buddhist without having a teacher, as far as I can see. I think you have to have a teacher. And I was thinking that even really to do anything in life, you need a teacher. I think that's probably true. To sort of do anything in life worthwhile, you need a teacher. Having a teacher is helpful because you can gain from their experience, but it also kind of has the connotation that you're willing to learn, and that if you accept a teacher, you have to, in a sense, accept that there's much more to know and that you're willing to learn. So I think, having a teacher in the Dharma is vital. I can't see how you could do it without it. Impossible, I'd have thought. So Bhante, Bhante, which means teacher, by the way, an expression of sort of devotion, affection. Bhante, let's think. So he had several teachers. So he had a lot of teachers. Some of them Tibetan, Rinpoches or lamas, Indian teachers, and he met a lot of those in Kalimpong or North India, and he was there for 14 years or so. Just to say that Bhante realised he was a Buddhist at the age of 16 when he read the Diamond Sutra and the Sutra of Hui Ning. So next time you're passing the library, pick up a copy of the Diamond Sutra and see what it does to you. It's incredible text, but more incredible that someone could become a Buddhist from reading it once and to understand it. It's remarkable. So there's a lineage from Bhante through his teachers all the way back to the Buddha. So Buddhism is still a living oral tradition, in my opinion. It's still a living oral tradition. And what am I trying to say? So in a way, I suppose the next being that I'd like to talk about is the Buddha, or try and talk about, at least a little bit, talk about the Buddha. We've got this kind of figure, haven't we? We've been sitting around the shrine with the Buddha on it. We've got this Buddha. What is the Buddha? He gained enlightenment. That's a fact. 2,500 years ago in northern India. A man called Siddhartha Gautama gained enlightenment and became a Buddha. Well, maybe you can imagine, he'd been, I don't know how much you know of the Buddha's life, I won't say a great deal, but he'd gone forth, he'd gone through a whole period of getting and learning meditation through teachers. He had gone through a whole period of austerities and very, very extreme austerities. He'd gone into thick jungles to meditate alone and work with his mind. And in a way, he'd come to he'd got to the end of what he thought he could do. He'd set out on this quest for enlightenment, and he tried everything, and he got to the point where it just didn't work. Yeah, it didn't work. And he recalled, you may know this, of course, but he recalled, he had this memory come to him of being a young child and sort of lying in the shade of a tree, shade of a rose apple tree on a hot day. His father was a ploughing match, and he'd just got into this meditative state, as it were, naturally, without making a great deal of effort. Very relaxed, very open, and in a way entered the dhyanas, or states of higher consciousness. And he remembered that, and he thought, well, maybe this is the way, maybe this is the way. So you can imagine him. He must have been pretty rough looking. He wouldn't have been dressed in a golden robe and glowing gold. He must have been nearly emancipated, very, very determined, probably pretty frightful, actually, I'd have thought. Like a real fire in his eyes and in his mind. And he decides to sit down and gain enlightenment and not leave the spot that he sits in until he does. And he even says, in a way, he's willing to give his life to that effort. He's willing to give his life to that effort, and that's what he does. And then I think, there's various things that happen, but in a way, the most prominent thing, in a way, that happens, is that he's attacked by Mara. So you probably know this. There's an attack of Mara. So Mara is, in a way, the personification of the dark, deep, ferocious forces of the human mind. In a way, you could say that Mara is the embodiment of the wheel of life. He's the personification of the wheel of life. And in a way, he comes into conflict with the Buddha, or he tries to raise conflict with the Buddha. So you have this fight suddenly break out, as it were, between Mara and the Buddha. Mara is basically the principle of death and destruction, isn't he? The reactive mind just does not want growth. Mara does not want growth and development. Mara wants reactivity. And so, of course, the Buddha has provoked Mara, hasn't he? The Buddha has provoked Mara. He's made this vow to basically leave the wheel of life completely behind. And Mara's suddenly been provoked into action. Okay, if you don't have very much commitment, Mara might not bother with you. But if you commit, if you really try and make an effort, of course Mara will come and try and intervene. And so Mara sends in his squadrons, and I've not noticed this before, but I was just reading in the book in the library what the squadrons are. Okay, so this is what the Buddha to be has to deal with in his mind. Okay, so sense desire, we've got that. We've all been working with that, haven't we, this week? Boredom is the second squadron. Hunger and thirst, the third. Craving, the fourth. Sloth and torpor, the fifth. Familiar stuff. Cowardice, that's pretty good, isn't it? Uncertainty. Malice. Obstinacy. Gain, honour and renown, that's a pretty big one. Ill-won notoriety. Self-praise and denigration of others. Self-praise and denigration of others. That's what Mara attacks with. So normally, I think that's a pretty good list. Probably most of us have been in all of those, haven't we? In the last week. And that's what the Buddha to be is faced with. So it's really interesting, isn't it? That here's this guy, completely determined on the threshold of enlightenment, and he still has to deal with all these things. Yeah, in a way, those are still part of his unenlightened mind. So in a way, it's very reassuring, isn't it? That that we have to deal with those things too. So traditionally, it's this interaction is illustrated by an image of all of Mara's squadrons kind of attacking the Buddha with clubs and stones and fire and oil and weapons and spears. And words, howling, screaming demons. That's how it's normally visualized, so that Mara is a personification of these forces in our mind. And as these implements of violence reach the Buddha, or the Buddha to be, they touch his aura, and everything turns to flowers, and the flower petals just fall onto the ground and cover the Buddha to be. Okay, so it's a beautiful image of the ceasing of the wheel of life. Beautiful image of the ceasing of the wheel of life. And then what happens is that the Buddha, well, the way that I've been thinking about it is that he starts to see with wisdom. So that one of the key things is that he doesn't annihilate Mara. So Mara continues to come back and try and taunt the Buddha nearly to the Buddha's last days. So Mara is always part of the Buddha's life. So that's quite interesting, isn't it? What's going on there? That this figure called Mara is always in the Buddha's life. But the thing to note is that Mara has no power over the Buddha, because the Buddha completely understands what Mara is. Yeah. So the Buddha just says, "I know you, I see you." Yeah. That's all he says. I know you, I see you. You have no power over me. So it's a seeing with a understanding of what's being seen. Do you see what I mean? That's what takes the power out of the reactive mind. You don't annihilate it. You don't come into conflict with it. You see it deeply for what it is, and then you're free from it. It doesn't kill it, as it were. There's no annihilation. but you're free from it. You're free from its power. And then you get these slightly humorous stories in the life of the Buddha, where this sort of slightly pathetic Mara keeps trying to taunt the Buddha. And it's quite humorous, and it always ends with Mara just kind of sort of getting shuffled off stage in a slightly embarrassing way. But I think that's a really key point, is that you don't annihilate, you don't come into conflict with the reactive mind. You see it deeply for what it is, and when it touches you, as it were, it turns to flowers. Okay, so then what happens, I think, is a deepening reflection, deepening of seeing with wisdom. Okay, so this is what I think then happens. So what happens, presumably the Buddha is in meditation, deep meditation. He's overcome these forces of the mind. Yeah, it is possible to do that. He's done that. And he starts to see life in a new way. Okay? So what he sees is, first of all, he's able to recall his past lives. Okay? Maybe some people can do that, and in fact, I think some people can, and I think some people do have a feel for not exactly where they've come from, but conditioning factors that have affected them from before their birth. Okay, the Buddha is able to see all his past lives. Okay, to see the path that he's taken to reach this spot. He is also able to see the lives of other beings, the coming into being and passing away of other beings. Yeah, he's able to see how other beings, lots and lots of other beings, human beings, come into, go through the cycles of birth and death, are embroiled, if you like, in their karma and their karma vipaka. And then it's interesting. One of the first expressions of the experience of enlightenment are the 12 links that Pranyamanas talked about last night. So in the Udana, which is some of the earliest teachings of the Buddha, he talks about, just after my enlightenment, I reflected thus, and then he talks about the 12 links exactly as they are on the wheel of life. So the wheel of life, the principles and the teaching of the wheel of life come immediately out of the Buddha's enlightenment. Okay. So I think this sort of period, don't exactly know how long it is. I mean, he was around the Bodhi tree for weeks, I don't know, maybe even longer, months. And but I think of this kind of period of reflection as a deepening of wisdom, so that he develops a wisdom that's able to see life clearly. We were doing that the other day, weren't we, in meditation? We were just trying to pay attention just to in a way the contact and feeling of our experience, so that we could just see it a bit more clearly. You just need to be able to see things a bit more clearly. And when we did that, some of you will know, you can then notice the habits of mind that mean you can't see things more clearly. So I wonder if we took that further and further, what that sort of seeing would then uncover. And, maybe what the Buddha sees is this. So he sees, he's able to recollect past lives. He sees the coming into being and going out of being of beings, and how karma and karma vipaka work. Okay. So then that's the Buddha. So that's the enlightenment. I mean, maybe it doesn't sound very poetic. In a way, I don't really know what to say about the enlightenment. You have this kind of human being. It's hot. It's hot. It's in India. He's found this patch of ground. He's maybe sat under a tree. Presumably he did. No one exactly knows, but presumably he sat under a tree, if only for the shade, rather than the symbolism which we now see it with, and gained enlightenment. Incredible. I don't know what that is, but it seems to have had a profound effect on the world and in people's lives, and still does. So this is up to the Buddha. So that's the second being, as it were, that I'd like to talk about. So the next being that I'd like to talk about is let's have a think. So what this again? These are just my reflections. So this is what I think happens: is that you have a deeper seeing into the nature of things with wisdom, and then you have a compassionate response to that. Okay. So we talk of wisdom and compassion being conjoined. I was just thinking of it in terms of, a compassionate response arises, as it were, independent on a deeper seeing of the nature of reality. So the Buddha's seen deeply into the nature of reality, and on the basis of that, compassion arises. And the embodiment of compassion is, so what I mean is the embodiment of compassion in the enlightened mind is Avalokitesvara. Okay? So we've already talked about Avalokitesvara a bit last week before some of you arrived, so I'll just briefly recap. But basically, Avalokitesvara is a figure that's the embodiment of compassion. Okay? So it's another symbol, if you like, or it's another expression of the enlightened mind. Okay, so that's a symbol, that's an expression, as it were, of the reactive mind, and Avalokitesvara is a symbol of the compassion of the enlightened mind. And as it happens, when we were looking at the realms recently, there's a Buddha in each realm, okay? And each of those Buddhas in each realm is Avalokitesvara. And actually, sometimes you can think of the monster that's holding the entire wheel as Avalokitesvara also, who is, out of compassion for us, holding the wheel so that it can stop spinning briefly for an instant, so we can at least see ourselves. Yeah. So you could think of Avalokitesvara like that, in that way. But each of the Buddhas in each of the realms, each of the Buddhas is Avalokitesvara. Okay. So I think this is a result of wisdom, and Avalokitesvara appears, as it were. So you have this figure. Actually, another thing about Avalokitesvara is you'll probably recognise the mantra Om Mani Padme Hum, very kind of well-known mantra, and it's a 6-syllable mantra, Om Mani Padme Hum, and each of those symbols is associated with each of the realms. Okay, so Avalokitesvara is a key figure in the wheel of life. And it's the compassion of the Buddha. And Avalokitesvara is known as the something like the cry regarder of the world. He regards the world's cries, looks upon the world with the eyes of compassion. And he's white. He's got 4 arms, and he in one arm, outstretched arm, there's a mala bead. So Avalokitesvara is counting living beings, that he's saving. On one hand, on the other hand, he holds a white lotus flower. Okay. And he has 2 hands at his heart center, maybe indicating his deepest heartfelt wish to be of benefit to all beings. And he's beautiful, of course, and youthful. He wears a deer skin. He like deers are very. It's not like they're frightened, because they can be quite curious. When you see a deer, it can kind of stop and look at you for a long time. But it's kind of quivering. So any movement or sudden movement of yourself, the deer will just run. So I really like that. Avalokitesvara is wearing this deer skin. I think of it in terms of him quivering with compassion for living beings. He's got that quivering nature, that responsiveness with living beings. So you've got this figure, beautiful face, beautiful eyes, beautiful hair, long black hair, very beautiful figure, and you can look in his eyes, as it were, beautiful blue eyes, and you can see reflections in his eyes. And what would we see if we looked into Avalokitesvara's eyes? What would we see? Well, what we would see are beings being born, human beings being born, human beings coming into the world, human beings with hopes and fears, human beings growing up through their life, some flowering, human beings getting old, getting ill, human beings dying. You might see reflected in his eyes armies, people in conflict. You might see people in conflict with their thoughts, with their words, with their fists, with weapons, with bombs. You might see a reflection of nations coming into being, passing away. You might see a reflection of villages coming into being, passing away. Huge cities, civilizations coming into being, passing away. You may see people, beings working at machines day after day. You may see lovers falling in love, falling out of love. You might see lovers who love each other. You might see lovers who hate each other. You might see lovers that are together and lovers that are apart. You might see families, groups of people, nations of people together, forming and disintegrating. And the closer you look into his eyes, the more repetitive it becomes. Birth keeps happening, death keeps happening, hope keeps arising, hope for the future keeps arising. There's a brief flowering of a human life, and then it weakens and it dies. You might see beings with, experiencing happiness and sadness and contentment and joy, and it's all so fleeting. And you see it all in Avalokitesvara's eyes. You'll see beings suffering from the pain of pride, superiority, competition, as we've been hearing on the wheel of life, unsatisfied desire, addictions, hatreds, overconsumption, and so forth, living in unawareness. This is what you might see in Avalokitesvara's eyes. And Avalokitesvara is obviously compassionate, and he feels so deeply for what he sees, he begins to weep, and tears fall from his eyes well up, and tears fall down his cheeks, and the tears that he cries out of compassion fall onto the earth, and the earth is of course dry and hard, and the tears fall and touch the earth, and they keep falling, and gradually a lake appears, a beautiful lake appears on the earth, and then what you have is the surface of the lake gets broken by the emergence of a incredibly beautiful and pure pale blue lotus flower, which emerges from the center of the lake. The lake has come into being because of Avalokitesvara's tears, and there's from the tears also comes white light, which sort of centers around the heart of the lotus, and forms a kind of mat of light upon the lotus. And on the lotus, on the mat of light, you have another being appear, who's green, who's called Tara, utterly beautiful, utterly divine, diaphanous with soft green light, beautiful eyes, beautiful smile, and sits half in meditation posture, with the one leg in meditation posture and the other leg, as we know, stepping out towards the world. And this is the activity of compassion. So Tara is the activity of Avalokitesvara, and has been born out of Avalokitesvara's tears in response to how he sees the world, okay? Which is a response to how the Buddha understands the world. Do you see? So there's a connection between how you see the world and how you respond to the world, and the two are the same or inseparable. So with wisdom you see the world more deeply for what it is, and with compassion you feel for the world more deeply, and you're able to act on the basis of that compassion. And for that you need Tara. So, in a way, that's all I really want to say. The only thing that really I just want to say is really just to bring us back to the Buddha in a way, and just to say that the Buddha's compassion was alive right at the start, way before he became a Buddha. And there's just one short, it's in poem form, of the Buddha speaking or observing life, and I just think it's got the seeds of what then later became wisdom and compassion. And he says, this world completely lacks essence. So he's in a way he's talking about samsara, he's talking about the reactive mind, how you perceive the world through the reactive mind. This world completely lacks essence. It trembles in all directions, so it's not stable. I longed to find myself a place unscathed, but I could not see it. So even then he feels this longing to be free of the reactive mind. Yeah, he feels this longing to be free of the reactive mind. And he's already searching for it, but he doesn't know what he's looking for. He can't see it. And he looks around and he sees people locked in conflict. It says, seeing people locked in conflict, I became completely distraught. So even then, you have this kind of clear seeing of what we're like as human beings and a compassionate response. But then I discerned here a thorn, hard to see, lodged deep in the heart, which I presume he means the thorn of craving, the thorn of grasping, which Pranimanas was talking about last night. It is only when pierced by this thorn that one runs in all directions. So, if that thorn is taken out, one does not run and settles down. Yeah. So I read this as if you take out the thorn of craving, as it were, you stop behaving on the basis of a reactive mind. You just stop it completely, so that you do not run anymore, but you settle down. So I'll leave it there. Thank you.